This is the worm bin that I constructed this afternoon for my brother-in-law. We wanted him to be able to have a source of worms anytime he wanted to go fishing, live worms, live bait, and at the same time be able to do a little bit of composting with kitchen scraps in their own house. My brother-in-law is a fisherman as just a hobby, and so we figured we would do a fish-themed gift. We got this handy-dandy cast iron fish bottle opener for him. But this was the main part of the gift that we wanted to give Eric. We have a larger version of this, actually 2 of them, in our enclosed patio. And these are worm bins. Now, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law aren't necessarily into the whole composting thing, and they do live in the city. We got the smaller size, the 3 gallons, so that even if they didn't have a lot of room, this can be fit pretty much anywhere. You can slide it under a table, or you can put it out in the garage, even set it on a shelf in the garage. It gives them a place to put some kitchen scraps from their cooking, and also provide my brother-in-law with a source of live bait for his fishing adventures. We're hopeful he will get a kick out of this. So you need 2 of the Rubbermaid totes. I prefer Rubbermaid because I think they are a good brand and they're fairly sturdy. You leave 1 intact, no holes in it, and this lid that goes with that one you can actually set to the side because you will not have need of that lid. If you want to put it underneath the whole contraption, you can, but honestly, unless you do something really weird with your bin, you're not really going to need it. But I guess you could put it underneath it if you like the aesthetic of it once you get it assembled. You may be wondering, why are there 2 buckets? Well, you put the worms and the food in this top bucket, and then you have those holes so that the liquid drains through to the bottom. And your bottom bucket is to hold that liquid. As you can see, I have drilled a bunch of holes in the bottom. Now, I did majority of the holes from the inside out. So I tilted it, used the drill, and drilled the holes. And as you can see, there are quite a few holes in the bottom of this. And the reason for that is one of our bins that we have has gotten clogged in the past. So it was obvious that I didn't have enough holes for the liquid to go through. Because as the food decomposes, number 1, the food will release liquid. And also as the worms process the food, they release liquids, and so you need a way for that liquid to drain through your worm bin to the bottom base. When I did a worm bin my first 2 years of college, I had it in just 1 container and slid it under the bed, and I had a really bad problem with flies, I think pretty much fruit flies and gnats and maybe even a few mites getting in there. When I've had issues with mites and flies in these, it's because I haven't aired it out enough. Like I've added way too much wet matter or table scraps to it all at once, and the worms couldn't keep up with it, so that invited more gnats in. But if you add small amounts on a regular basis, like every 3 or 4 days or so, it keeps those pest populations down. And by having more holes in your tote at the bottom, it'll allow some of that moisture to flow through. And that was my problem with the one that I had those first 2 years of college, because I didn't have a way for that moisture to escape. It just sat in the bottom of that bin and got soggy and nasty and was a breeding ground for all kinds of things. So that's the importance of having the 2 bins. So I've got the holes in the bottom so that the liquid can pass through. Your bottom one doesn't have the hole, so it catches the liquid. And then these naturally nest on top of each other and leave a gap, which is another reason I really like the Rubbermaid brand. And then you put holes in this gap. You can even put holes lower, but I just put them straight across. And these holes allow for proper ventilation, for air to flow through to keep some of that excess moisture down and to provide the worms with oxygen. And you do that all the way around. And then you also poke holes in the lid, and you'll see there's quite a few holes in the lid too. But again, it's because they aren't huge holes, but I want enough air to pass through for proper ventilation. On this row of holes at the top, I went ahead and took something rough and rubbed off the excess plastic that kind of pokes out and protrudes after the drilling. Now I did it on this top row simply because my brother-in-law and sister-in-law are going to be putting their hands in at the top, and I didn't want them to scrape their hands as they did it. On the lid, I left it because I'm trying to discourage the worms from crawling out through the holes. They probably still can do it, but that's the reason I left it on the lid, so it could be like a little barrier as the worm tries to crawl around and maybe wants to get through one of the holes. For the holes at the bottom of the tote, for the liquid to go through, for this particular design, I chose a 1/16, and that's because I wanted it to be big enough that the liquid would pass through, but not so big that the worms would easily pass through. Although there will still be some worms that go through, and so when you take the top bin out of the bottom bin, you'll find some worms in that bottom one in the juice. It's just part of it. But your vermicomposting bin will have plenty of worms, and you won't have to fret the few that do go through. And then the holes that I did in the lid and then in this edge in the gap space was a little bit bigger. It was the 3/32 hole. Now you could probably go a little bit bigger to allow even more ventilation. You just want to be careful not to make them too big, or you might have worms coming out of your bin at an even faster rate because it'll make it easier for them to escape. Now, having said that, if you keep your bin under a light, like have a light shining directly on it, then that will kind of force the worms to stay in their bin because they want to stay away from the light. We don't do that though, because we don't want to generate that extra electricity. Now, if we were really working on worm production, we might keep lights in there just to keep the temperature up, because the colder it gets, the slower the worms move, and their metabolism slows down and all the production goes down at that point. So that is a consideration too. It all depends on what your end game is with your vermicomposting bin. And worms will try to kamikaze. Whenever I had my first big bin of this same type design in Arlington, so the guest bathroom was where my worm composting bin lived. And yes, people thought I was weird because I vermicomposted in the city in an apartment, but that's okay. So back to the kamikazing worms. So they would escape, and I came home one day and I was like, what is this dry stringy stuff that's all over the carpet in this guest bedroom? And I went into the bathroom and saw them on the floor in there too, and I realized it's these worms that are crawling out of the worm bin, because once they get out, they're looking for another habitat, but they can't find water, and so they end up drying out before they can get to a habitat that's more suitable to their needs. And the reason they would kamikaze was most likely due to either mites because of excess moisture, because I was still trying to perfect the design, or two, because the population had gotten so big in that bin that I really needed to split it. So I split it before I moved out here. So I actually had 2 vermicomposting bins in my apartment before I moved out to this property. But my brother-in-law and sister-in-law probably won't have that problem of overpopulation, because we're hopeful that our brother-in-law will use the worms for his fishing ventures. So once my brother-in-law has a chance to look at the design, just in case he wants to make another one of his own later on, we will add in some bedding and some red wiggler worms from our current bins, and then add in some food scraps for them to start chowing down on so they can make it their home.
Hey Cloud Hoppers, thanks for watching the video. Push the thumbs up to like the video. Also hit that subscribe button, also the bell, so that you can get notifications when our videos come out.
Check us out on our social media pages too. We have Facebook and Pinterest, and soon we'll have Instagram. The links are below. Bye y'all!
Bye! Good job.